Hi, welcome to Armchair Philosophy. I'm Ruben Marshak. Today, we're going to be discussing the Socratic Method. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about who Socrates was. There are a few extant accounts of Socrates by various philosophers and playwrights, but the most common source in academia is Plato. In accordance with what Plato wrote, Socrates died at 71 years old in 399 BCE by ingestion of hemlock. He was sentenced to death by an Athenian court for the charge of corrupting the youth, though it's clear in the Apology that he wasn't actually guilty of those crimes. And he also seemed to make himself a nuisance to all of the men in Athens, so there may have been a lot of bias against him. Socrates was also something of a mystic. He believed strongly in the words of oracles, and he even had his own dealings with supernatural entities, though that isn't commonly discussed in academia. It is present in the literature. If Plato's account is to be taken seriously, then Socrates' final words were a request to sacrifice an animal to the god Asclepius, who was a god of healing the sick. This, in addition to various lectures that he made on the Greek afterlife, suggests that Socrates was a devout religious person. In the end, however, we don't have any first-hand accounts of Socrates since he didn't actually write anything. We only have second-hand accounts, and they might not give us an accurate depiction of who he actually was. It's also the case in some plays and other dialogues that Socrates is used strictly as a character, and they clearly don't demonstrate who Socrates actually was. What we do have is the so-called Socratic Method, which is basically just how Socrates does philosophy in Plato's dialogues. In essence, Plato's dialogues were a demonstration of how philosophy was supposed to be done at the time. But before I describe more about the Socratic Method, I'd like to go a bit into Plato's Epistemology. For those who don't know, epistemology is, in essence, the study of knowledge. A priori knowledge is usually defined as the stance that all knowledge can be attained through rational principles instead of attaining it through empirical principles. And although Socrates did not support any kind of a priori knowledge in the strict sense, he did believe that knowledge was inherent to the human soul. In Meno, Socrates used a young boy who had never studied geometry in order to demonstrate that the boy could still come to true geometric conclusions. This demonstrated through Socrates' reasoning that the knowledge to be able to do that was inherent to the boy because he had never been taught it in any classroom or empirically given the information. In other words, that knowledge is an intrinsic as opposed to an extrinsic process. Socrates' position would also imply the longevity of the soul, because presumably there would have to be some time in which the soul gains this information outside of the body, because the body had not gained that information. That is the main assumption of the Socratic Method, that the knowledge to any kind of question that you might have is already likely contained within your mind or soul. The Socratic Method itself is a means of inquiry by which a person can access that soul information, or at least eliminate false hypotheses. Specifically, it works to eliminate hypotheses which clearly won't lead to a satisfying conclusion. Here's how it works. A question, or a series of questions, are presented in order to assess the fundamental beliefs or premises that a person is working with. Then, you find contradictions within those premises and try to eliminate them one by one in order to find a satisfying conclusion. Most of the time, however, a satisfying conclusion isn't reached. The best example of this is in the dialogue Euthyphro. Euthyphro states that piety is what is dear to the gods, and impiety is what's not dear to them. But Socrates points out that Euthyphro believes in many gods, some of whom have conflicting opinions. Throughout the text, Socrates just pokes holes in these contradictions and forces Euthyphro to try and come to a more reasonable conclusion. Ideally, this refinement of a person's own beliefs is supposed to lead them to the conclusion that they are fundamentally ignorant. Socrates often said that he didn't know anything at all, and that kind of lack of foregone conclusions and preconceived notions is a major goal for any kind of philosopher or truth seeker within the Socratic system. This is possibly one of the earliest uses of parsimony in Western literature, and its effect can still be seen today. Law schools and courtrooms across America use the Socratic method every day. In fact, the very most basic things such as examination and cross-examination are, in effect, the Socratic method. Questions are presented until a contradiction occurs, and then those contradictions are pursued until the truth is found out, hopefully. This finds its way into pop culture through courtroom dramas and even video games like the Ace Attorney series. There are even practicing psychotherapists who use the Socratic method and Socratic dialogue in their therapy sessions with their patients. Let's go over a brief demonstration of the Socratic method in a kind of dialogue. John and Stacy are friends, and they're sitting down to lunch, and they get to talking. Stacy's been talking about empathy and how much she loves animals. John mentions that he has a cat, but Stacy says that she doesn't like cats. John then points out a contradiction, that Stacy said she likes animals, but that she doesn't like cats. If the statement that she likes animals is being used to support the conclusion that she's an empathetic person, then it needs to be adjusted, or that conclusion can't be reached reasonably. So the statement needs to be adjusted. Stacy loves all animals except for cats, and assuming that John is more of a dog person anyway, that might be excusable. Or not. Further examination might also show that she dislikes his pet tarantula, and that might lead to an increasingly complex problem. Maybe a more scientific example can help. Suppose you were working on the hypothesis that the Earth is flat. Before even advancing to the testing stage, you want to figure out if your hypothesis is reasonable. So you call up your friend who's an astrophysicist. She then points out that you trust what she says, and her knowledge is predicated on the rules which say that the Earth is not flat. Because of that, you have a contradiction before you've even advanced to the testing stage of your hypothesis. Hopefully that helped you understand a little bit more about the Socratic method. That's all for this time on Armchair Philosophy. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to keep up to date with us. We have a website now, and you should follow us on social media if you want to keep even more up to date. We are also going to be appearing at MythCon, and we are going to be selling t-shirts. There are also t-shirts for sale which you can order through the website, and there will be probably a PayPal option involved. We do have some patron exclusive content planned coming out later, and people should be excited for that. If you donate to us, you'll help us grow, and you'll get some goodies like that in return. So it really works out for everybody. But that's all for now. See you next time.